Stand up for Jesus. Good thoughts, sometimes hard to do. Sometimes hard to take a stand for Jesus. Sometimes it's hard to do what we know we should do as Christians when we might face criticism, we might face ridicule from people in the world around us, maybe people we know, coworkers, peers, maybe people we don't know, media, television, people making fun of us, people trying to beat us down, and yet we still have to stand up for Jesus. Open your Bible to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, please. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Have you been watching the Olympics? If you haven't, you have to wait 4 more years for the Winter Olympics to come back. You can wait 2 more years for the Summer Olympics. I don't know what it is about the 4-year sporting events, but I get really excited. And my excitement has maybe become a little more subdued in the last couple of years, I guess. Stacy might be thinking, he doesn't get all that excited. But I used to get just really, over-the-top excited about the 4-year events. Summer Olympics, Winter Olympics, even the World Cup. And I don't care a thing in the world about Soccer. I spell it because my oldest child plays it. And if she heard me say I don't care about it, that could be devastating. World Cup time comes around, and I don't even care all that much for the sport, but I get excited about it. It's a national pride thing. When the Olympics are going on, we root for Team USA in sports that we don't even know what they are. Curling. We get excited about watching curling and nobody knows what the rules are. We don't even know what the object is. Whoever would have thought that if you put shuffleboard on ice, it would be really exciting? But it is. And then there are other sports in the Winter Games, just because those are going on right now, that are strange and they're exhilarating. The large downhill. You seen that? These guys have these 12-foot long skis and they go down this hill and they're just flying. And then they go off the end of it and they're just doing this for like 150 meters. It's amazing. It's terrifying. And then I watch Lindsey Vonn doing the alpine downhill skiing, and she makes it down several thousand feet in 1:32 seconds or whatever. And like, I look at that and I think, if I tried to walk down that mountain, I would be breaking bones. And hairpin turns and just whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. It's incredible. To watch these Olympic athletes, it's amazing. The strength that they possess and the determination that they have. And you see it in their eyes before they start their events, that you can just tell they are so focused on what they're doing. And it's amazing to me to watch these best athletes in the world compete. But did you know that the Olympics are not a new thing? In fact, it's one of the oldest things that we know of in history. The Greek Olympics go back all the way to 776 BC. 776 BC is the first time that the Olympic Games in Olympia, Greece, were officially recognized. Now, there are some historians who think that it's even older than that, but it wasn't officially recognized until 776 BC. Let me give you some framework here, just some reference, biblical reference of time. 776 BC, Jeroboam II was the king in Israel, and Jonah was preaching to the Assyrians in 776 BC. And so here we are, 2,800 years later, and this Olympic Games activity is still going on every 4 years. Now, the Olympics started, if you see there on the map, you see Achaia or Greece, you see mainland Greece there, and I've got the city of Corinth in red there for reasons that we will come to in just a moment. But if we zoom in a little bit on that section of mainland Greece, you see Olympia over here on the west side of mainland Greece. That's where the Olympics were held. The city of Olympia, 776. Every 4 years, this athletic competition was held in honor of the god Zeus, the granddaddy of them all. Well, over in the city of Corinth, which you see is over on the east side of mainland Greece, there was another Games, kind of like the Olympics that were going on. And again, if we zoom in even further to where Corinth is there on that east side of mainland Greece, you see in the red there the Isthmus of Corinth. That's that stretch of land there where those words are. That's called the Isthmus of Corinth. And on that stretch of land was the Isthmian Games. The Isthmian Games. Second only in Greece to the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games, that was like the major leagues, okay? The Isthmian Games were AAA, all right? This is not quite as well known, but still very big event, very important event in the mind of the Corinthian people especially, but to all of Eastern Greece. This event, the Isthmian Games, these were not held in honor of the god Zeus, but rather the god Poseidon, the god of the sea. And these games also held every 4 years. They would, kind of like the Summer and Winter Olympics do now, they alternate every 2 years. It was the same way with the Olympic Games and the Isthmian Games. So one of them would occur every 2 years. The Isthmian Games, very similar to the Olympic Games. There were foot races, boxing matches, wrestling matches, track and field events. They had javelin, the discus throw. Those are not new games. People have been throwing spears and rocks for a long time, apparently. And that's what they did. So these games were a big deal. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, it seems that Paul draws upon this idea of the Isthmian Games when he writes 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27. Look at that text with me. 1 Corinthians 9, look at verse 24. Look at the very beginning of verse 24, where he says, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run?" And he goes on. But I want you to notice his question. Do you not know? He's not being serious in that question. Of course they knew. The Isthmian Games happened right in their backyard. They knew all about these games. They knew all of the events. They probably knew the names of the athletes who participated in the events, kind of like we do with our college football. We keep up with the roster, and we know the names and their jersey number and what year of school they're in. We know what town they're from, and we follow that recruiting process. I'm sure they did the same thing. And so Paul says, do you not know that? And he goes on to talk about these events. Of course they knew. They got excited about the Olympics. They got excited about the Isthmian Games, and I'm sure they had excellent NBC coverage the whole time they were going on. Tough crowd. All right. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run? Well, of course they knew. And in this passage, Paul draws on these Isthmian Games to make some points about the Christian life. Now this is interesting. It's not proven, but it's interesting to think about. On his second missionary journey, which you can read about in Acts 16, 17, and in the first portion of chapter 18, Paul visits the city of Corinth in Acts chapter 18, in the early verses of that chapter. And it is believed by some that while he is there in Corinth, you remember in Acts 18, about verse 11, it says he was there for 18 months. And it's believed by some that in the 18-month period that he was there, the Isthmian Games occurred. And Paul saw them. Probably used that as an evangelistic opportunity. People from all over mainland Greece are going to be coming to Corinth to see these games. And that's opportunity for Paul to preach. And so with that image of the games in his mind, he draws upon that to teach about running to win. And that's what I want to consider with you for just a few moments this morning. Our sermon this morning is going to be abbreviated because Alan Mosley is going to be giving a very brief financial report to the congregation. And so I have shortened my sermon this morning to make some points from this. And Olympics have been on my mind lately, and probably yours too if you've been watching TV. So let's look at this passage again, and let's make a few quick points from it. Let's read it again together. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24, beginning. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Therefore I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air, but I discipline my body and I make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. Verse 26, he says, I run and I box. Foot racing and boxing, two of the biggest events at the Isthmian Games, two of the biggest events at the Olympic Games. And Paul says, when you see runners who are preparing and practicing and training for their foot races, it appears to you in their training races that they're just running without aim. And they are when they're training. They don't necessarily have a purpose in mind. When you're training for a marathon and you're running a distance just to build up your body's ability to do that, you don't really have a purpose. You don't have a designated aim. You don't have a finish line. You're just running to build up your body's strength. But on race day, there's a finish line and you have an aim. You have a purpose. Or if you go to see someone who is practicing boxing, he's training for his boxing match. Well, in practice, he might just be punching the air and working on his movements. He might be working on his footwork, but he's not actually fighting against a person. Paul says, that's not what I'm doing. In my Christian life, I'm not beating the air. I've got somebody in front of me, and I'm trying to land a punch. I've got a purpose in my boxing. I have a purpose in what I'm doing. This is not training anymore. It's game day. It's event day. All right? So look at these metaphors that Paul uses, and let's see some things that he says. Let me suggest to us, number one, that when it comes to our lives as Christians and running this race and winning these games, there is no silver medal. You know, this idea that we have in our Olympic Games today where everybody competes and then the winners are chosen and then there's a podium and you've got the gold medal winner who is at the top, the highest section of the podium, and then the mid section, the medium section is the silver, and then down the bottom section is the bronze. You've got three winners, gold, silver, and bronze. It wasn't that way in the ancient games. There was one winner and only one winner. And it didn't matter how many people were racing in that foot race. It didn't matter how many people came through the boxing match with all of the contestants fighting. One person won. And so Paul says, do you not know that all who run in the race run, but only one receives the prize? There's no silver medal. There's no bronze medal. You run in the race and you either win or you don't. And so when you think about our lives as Christians, Paul then says, now you run so that you can win. You don't run for silver. You don't run for bronze. You run to win. You run to get in first place. When I was in high school, I was a junior in high school, our baseball team, we had a pretty good team, and we made it to the state tournament that year. We had a very good record. I don't remember what it was. It was something 25-6 or something like that. It was pretty good. And it was the week before the state tournament. We're about to go to Memphis, Tennessee to play in the state tournament. And I'll never forget this. My head coach, he pulled us all together at the beginning of practice, and we had a huddle at the beginning of practice every day. And he looked over to one of my teammates and he said, John, we've had a pretty good year, right? We won a lot of games. We've gotten better. We've had a good season. And we're going to the state tournament. And, you know, if we get out there and, hey, what if we lost our first two games? It was a double elimination tournament. If we lose our first two games, hey, that's okay. We've still had a pretty good year, right? And John is sitting there. He said, yeah, I've had a pretty good year. Yeah, that's right. And I remember my coach saying, no, we're going out there to win. We're not going out there to come in last place. You run to win. There is not an Olympic athlete in the summer games who says, you know what, I am competing with all of my heart for bronze. No. You go for the gold and you settle for the bronze. You settle for the silver. But Paul says in this case, no, you're running to win. And when you think about what he's teaching us in our lives as Christians, what's the gold medal? Heaven. Heaven is the gold medal. Is there a silver? No. You either get the gold or you don't. And so he says you run in such a way that you may win. What did they receive in the ancient games? He tells us in this verse. He says in verse 25, they run to receive a perishable wreath. They would get a crown that was made out of dried foliage. It might be pine leaves, pine needles. It might be the dried leaves of some kind of herbs or spices or what have you. But, if we know anything about flowers and foliage, we know that it doesn't last forever. We all bought roses for our wives 2 weeks ago, and how many of them are still looking good? No, that's just what flowers do. They wilt, they fade, they die. Some of you guys are like, flowers, 2 weeks? What's he talking about? Did I miss my anniversary or something? No, you see, the wreaths that they got, they perished. They were perishable wreaths. They didn't last forever. Although, this is an interesting fact. Many of the contestants who won, they would have statues, shrines built in their honor, and the walkways that would lead to these statues were oftentimes lined with pine trees, which that's what the wreath was made out of, and they would plant pine trees for them as another way to honor them. And that lasted a little bit longer than their wreath did. But Paul says he says they receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. I'm not going to take the time to do this, but in your mind or sometime later, turn over to 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul's final letter, where he says, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. I've run the race. I've kept the faith. I've finished the course, etc. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness. It's not a perishable crown like they received in the ancient games. His was going to be an eternal crown. So, let me suggest to us, number one, there is no silver medal. Let me suggest, number two, we need self-control as we compete in the games. Look at what he says in verse 25. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. Self-control, but let me emphasize, in all things. In everything there is self-control. When you watch these Olympic athletes who are playing and competing in their various sports, you know that their lives have to have self-control in everything. They are self-controlled in their training regiments, in their weight training and cardiovascular training regiments. They are self-controlled in their diet. You think they're all sitting around eating boxes of Twinkies every week? Their sleep habits are structured and they follow those things. And if they don't do that, they will not be competitive, much less be successful in their competition. They must exercise self-control in all things. And we need to do the same thing. We have to have self-control in all aspects of life. Now, that's not something that we just flip on a switch and we get it immediately. It's something that takes time, and we have to develop that ability over time. But we have to develop that ability not just in one portion of life, not just in a few portions of life, but in all things we have to have self-control. Well, what good is it if we have self-control over our speech but not over our temper? Now, I would suggest to you that if you can do that, that's quite a feat. You can control your speech, but not your temper. Usually, if you can't control your temper, you can't control your speech either. But what good is it to have control over one thing, but not over another? Or what if you can control your speech, but you can't control your thoughts? And so your thoughts are just eaten up with lust and perversion and other kinds of hatred and animosity toward people. What good is it? What good is it for the Olympic athlete to have self-control in his diet, but not in his weight training? What good is it for the Olympic athlete to have self-control in her weight training, but not in her diet? You see, it has to be pervasive. Self-control in all things. If we want to have a winning strategy, self-control is something that we need to be thinking about, praying about, meditating on, and improving in. And finally, let me suggest to us that we have to have diligence. And I think this is seen in all of this passage. The word's never used, but the idea is implied within it. Diligence, the will to finish. How do the men running those foot races finish that marathon? Diligence, perseverance, the will to finish, the will to win. Diligence is a kind of a stick-to-itiveness that we have to have. It is... I thought really hard about this, and I'm going to say it, and I hope this is not anticlimactic, but diligence is squeezing the last little bit of toothpaste out of the tube. That's diligence, folks. And we need that. We need diligence in all aspects of life. Diligence is keeping the main thing, keeping our focus where it needs to be and putting one foot in front of the other day after day, week after week, year after year, and saying, this is what I'm going to do because I am a Christian and I am running. I am boxing, I am competing, I am giving this all that I've got, and I am being diligent in my service to the Lord. So, while there are many who begin the race with the greatest of hopes, dreaming of being on that podium, getting that gold medal, for every Olympic athlete who actually makes it to the games and competes, you can bet there are thousands more who never made it. Is that true of Christians too? For every Christian who competes and makes it to the end, how many are there who didn't? Because they didn't have diligence. So do you have the will to win? Do you have the will to compete? I hope you do. If you're not a Christian this morning, we invite you to become one, to have that diligence, to display that self-control, because there is no silver medal. There's only a gold, and that's heaven. And that's where I want to be, and I hope that's where you want to be as well. If we can help you this morning, we invite you to come as we stand and sing a song of invitation.